Now when we divide decimals by decimals, like in 5 and 6 tenths divided by 7 tenths, we are going to set up the problem in long division format. The divisor goes outside the bracket, if we remember, and the dividend goes inside. So this is 7 tenths into 5 and 6 tenths. Now when we divided whole numbers into decimals, we could just bring the decimal point up and start dividing. But what we need to do first is make this divisor into a whole number. It's a very simple process to do that. We move the decimal one time to the left, the decimal's now back here, and we are now dividing by the whole number 7. But since we moved the decimal one place in the divisor, we have to move the decimal one place in the dividend. It's like we multiplied the divisor by 10 to make 7 tenths into 7. So we have to, in essence, multiply the dividend by 10 and move the decimal place one time to the right. So now we're dividing 7 into 56. 7 goes into 56 8 times. 8 times 7 is 56. That's the end of our problem. 8 is our quotient, and if we multiply that quotient times the divisor of 7 tenths, we end up with 5 and 6 tenths, which was what our dividend was to start the problem. In our next example, we're going to divide 14 hundredths into 1 96 hundredths. This time, the dividend has 2 decimal places, so we're going to have to move the divisor has 2 decimal places. We're going to have to move the decimal 2 times to the right in order to make it a whole number. Remember, we're moving the decimal to the end of the divisor to make it a whole number. Since we moved the decimal 2 times in the divisor, we need to move the decimal 2 times in the dividend. So the decimal's now there, behind the 196. So it's like dividing 14 into 196. So we'll divide 14 into 19, goes one time. And then 14 into 16 goes one time. I'm sorry. There was a subtraction error there. This should be 5, and we bring down the 6. 14 goes into 56 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, and we get 56. So we have a final quotient of 14. If we have a problem like 14 hundredths divided into 91 hundredths, we start off, we have to move the decimal 2 times to the right in the divisor to make it a whole number. So we move the decimal 2 times to the right in the dividend to make it balance out. Remember, if we move the decimal 2 times in the divisor, we move it 2 times in the dividend. So now we're ready to divide 14 into 91. 14 goes into 91 6 times. 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. We're going to subtract this, and we get a remainder of 7, which is less than the divisor of 14. So, remember, we can't leave a remainder here, so we're going to have to bring this decimal up, add a 0 behind that decimal, and then we can continue to divide. 14 into 70 goes 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. And now the remainder is gone. Again, if we have a problem like 3 and 5 tenths divided by 2 and 5 tenths. 2 and 5 tenths is the divisor. I'm going to divide that into 3 and 5 tenths. Since we have 1 decimal place in the divisor, we have to move it 1 place before we start dividing, and then we have to move the decimal 1 place in the dividend as well. We divide 25 into 35, goes one time. 1 times 25 is 25. We subtract and get a remainder of 10, which is less than the divisor when we compare, but we can't keep a remainder. So our decimal's already here. We're going to have to add a 0 behind it and bring the decimal point up. Now we can bring the 0 down and divide 25 into 100. Goes 4 times. 4 times 25 is 100. Sometimes we have problems like 5 divided by 6, which would set up as 6 into 5. 6 doesn't go into 5, so we're going to have to add a decimal and 0 behind it, bring the decimal up, and then we can divide 6 into 50. Goes 8 times. 8 times 6 is 48. We subtract and get 2, which is less than the divisor, but we have a remainder, which we can't have, so we're going to add a 0, bring it down, and divide again. 6 goes into 23 times. 3 times 6 is 18. And we get a remainder of 2 again. So if we get a 0, another 0 and bring it down, look what we're dividing again. 6 into 20 goes 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. We're going to get another remainder of 2. We're starting to notice that this is going to repeat. So what we're going to do is stop dividing, and we're going to say that our quotient is 83 hundredths with the 3 repeating. And this bar shows us that the 3 is the repeating digit. Another example, 2 divided by 1 and 1/10 sets up as 1 and 1/10 divided into 2. The divisor has 1 decimal place, so we have to move the decimal 1 time before we can divide. Now when we go to the dividend, it doesn't have a decimal to start. But remember, if we move the decimal 1 place in the divisor, we have to move the decimal 1 place in the dividend. So that means we're going to have to add the decimal, move it 1 time to the right, and add a 0 into that empty spot. So now we're dividing 11 into 20. 11 goes into 20 1 time. 1 times 11 is 11. We subtract and get a remainder of 9. So we're going to have to bring the decimal up and add a 0 behind it so we can keep dividing. 11 into 90 goes 8 times. 8 times 11 is 88. And we get a remainder of 2, which is less than the divisor 11. So we have to keep adding a 0. 11 into 20 is 1. 1 times 11 is 11. And we get a remainder of 9. This should start seeming familiar. We add another 0. Bring it down. 11 into 90 is 8. 8 times 11 is 88. And you see we're getting a 2. This is just going to keep repeating. Now in this case, it's a little different than the first example where it was just 1 digit that was repeating. If we notice in this one, we're going to get the 8, the 1, and if we were to divide again, we would get another 1. So we can see that the 81 is the repeating part. So our bar would now have to go over the 8 and the 1 to show that both digits repeat.